Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is, before I do my hits and losses video, I want to do a little walk through what's been going on around Pokrovsk and concern ourselves with some panic that is taking place among some analysts as to the reality of this supposed breakthrough. Some people claim it's a breakthrough, other people saying it's definitely not a breakthrough. And we are talking about the area around Pokrovsk. You can see on Andrew Perpetua's map that it's looking fairly desperate. This is Pokrovsk, and you have Myrnahrad just there. You've got some deep reconnaissance groups and all sorts of activity going right around to the north of Pokrovsk, possibly across this very important main supply route. And then we're going to be predominantly talking about this movement up here. And that is what people are really worried about. It's a sort of 7 to 10 kilometer, scare quotes, breakthrough that has taken place up to a place called Kucherev Yar, Vesely as well, and this place is Zolotyi Kolodyaz. So you're going to hear those sort of names mentioned a number of times. It is all looking rather hairy around here, so it's not good news. The question is it as bad as some people are saying? So there have been a number of analysts calling for the resignation of Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief for the Ukrainian armed forces. So it's got fairly serious. Right, let's go through what the claims are. So Christopher Miller from the Financial Times, we're going to start with him. We're going to look at a number of different people saying, yes, some really dooming, others not so much. Since Russia first invaded Ukraine in 2014, it's always ramped up military operations ahead of high-level talks on the war. That has continued since Putin's full-scale invasion began in 2022. We're seeing the latest offensive intensify ahead of Friday's summit with Trump. So one claim is that they are throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this area precisely because there are these talks in Anchorage in Alaska on Friday, and Putin wants to take in a success into that because momentum can translate into an advantage in negotiations, right? Christopher Miller again saying a Russian breach on Ukraine's eastern front line has triggered a wave of indignation and confusion in Kyiv ahead of a crucial summit between Trump and Putin, in which the Russian president is expected to try and lock in battlefield gains. Ukrainian and Western analysts said Russian forces had advanced nearly 15 kilometers over the past few days. And I did report on this the other day, might have been yesterday, that there have been claims of this. Actually, I think some of the early moves had taken place 3 to 4 days previously. But anyway, the past few days along a narrow corridor parallel to Dobropillia, a coal mining town turned key logistical hub north of the stronghold of Pokrovsk. So remember, here we've got Pokrovsk there, and you've got obviously Slovyansk, Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Slovyansk, and other places over there. So this is where we're talking about, and let's try and find Dobropillia for you because a lot of people are talking about this. So the coal mining town of Dobropillia, you've got this Pokrovsk, Myrnahrad, and this main supply route, as I mentioned earlier, comes up there, does a dog leg, and you've got Dobropillia there, and that is where it looks like this is supposedly a logistics hub. As you can see, there are quite a few roads coming out of that as we zoom in. That's, you're going to hear a lot about Dobropillia, essentially. So anyway, a coal mining town turned key logistical hub north of the stronghold of Pokrovsk that Russian troops have nearly encircled. The situation unfolding in the Donetsk region is the result of actions or inaction that has been constantly warned about for a year and a half, said Taras Chmut, founder of Come Back Alive, one of the largest Ukrainian charities providing weapons to the military. The Bogdan Krotovich, former chief of staff of the Azov National Guard Brigade, said, quote, "Mr. President, I sincerely don't know what exactly is being reported to you, but I'm informing you on the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka line, without exaggeration, it's complete chaos." Right, so there are some pretty damning uh, appraisals of what's going on there. Here's one map from Clement Molin, who's a young sort of French mapper. Intel Schizo says, in short, it's not bad, it's catastrophic. So some people are really saying this is very, very bad. Russian breakthrough has been confirmed. Ukrainian new Donbass line bypassed in the most vulnerable point. So why this is, as some people say, particularly bad, is that you've got the main sort of defensive line that has potentially been breached. I mean, these are, going through all of these smaller defensive lines and trench networks to get to one of the main ones and then breach that and get behind that is a disaster, as some would say. Russian assault platoons are rushing behind Ukrainian lines. They can now turn west and threaten Dobropillia, which is there. Or continue north to Kramatorsk, and that will be in danger. So, people saying if they load into here, this is a massive problem. Tatarigami says, if you look at the map around Pokrovsk, you may finally see why I've long been worried about both the city and the trajectory of the war. Talk of big enemy losses, forecasts of economic collapse, or claims I'm too negative won't change it. Change starts by seeing problems. This is not an operational breakthrough. It is, however, penetration of the defenses, and a penetration can turn into a breakthrough. For now, though, what we're seeing is more of a massive walkthrough. So the claims are, there are claims that it's a big breakthrough. Others saying, look, these are just deep reconnaissance groups that have managed to get very far behind the Ukrainian lines. Play for us is a bit of a doomer. Random reminder that meanwhile there is some commander who is forcing the Ukrainians to cling to operationally encircled fields that are currently being supplied through drones, a bit of standard foot infantry, a tiny bit of vehicles, mostly for rotations, and boats through the reservoir. Now think about Zolotyi Kolodyaz. Congratulations, you've discovered what one of the main problems of the Ukrainian army consists of. So what he's saying here is this is around the sort of Toretsk area. Let's go back to the main map. I think saying that around here you got people holding on for dear life, and Andrew Perpetua said this before, that the Ukrainians often make a mistake of trying to defend somewhere for too long and other places not long enough. And it's trying to work out what needs to be held on to, particularly. Does this area need to be held on to as much as, I don't know, this area here would be what Playfryer is saying, as far as I can work out. So, End Strike, another source, says the coming days will be decisive for the fate of 30% of Donetsk region, currently under Ukrainian control. In recent days, Russian forces in Donetsk Oblast, despite suffering massive losses, have advanced about 18 kilometers into Ukrainian defensive lines, primarily on foot or using light vehicles, motorcycles, and buggies. This advance has bypassed Dobropillia and reached a highway linking Dnipro with Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Ukraine now has very little time to cut off and destroy these Russian units. This will be possible if Kiev can send several mechanized battalions to the sector and organize a counterattack. More on that in a second, as Russian units in the area currently lack active support from FPV kamikaze drones. If this attempt is delayed or fails, Russia is expected to deploy mechanized units with armored vehicles to the breach and begin intensive FPV drone use, making it much harder to push them out. In the worst case scenario, the region's two last major cities, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, will be isolated from the Dnipro region, with supplies coming only from the Kharkiv direction. It must be stressed, if Ukraine cannot deal with a few hundred Russian infantry cut off from their own logistics, the Ukrainian army will not be able to maintain long-term control of the region. Ukraine must act swiftly to reclaim at least 15 square kilometers of territory within the next few days. Okay, so some people, and I think that's probably fairly accurate there. I mean, if nothing's done about this, this will turn into a breakthrough, and it does render the whole region far more vulnerable, right? So the Ukrainians definitely need to do something about this. Tatarigami again says, please refer to my note 4 days ago. This is critical. In both 2014 and 15, Russia launched major offensives ahead of negotiations to gain leverage. The current situation is serious, but far from the collapse some suggest. So what is actually happening on the ground? A collapse in military terms means a loss of command and control a breakdown in battlefield awareness, and an inability to regroup, withdraw to in an organized fashion or coordinate with units. To the best of my knowledge, none of these conditions are currently present. The situation more closely resembles events of May 2024, when Russian forces slipped through unprepared Ukrainian defenses along the border and advanced nearly 10 kilometers. The incursion was eventually contained and remained a localized pocket. At this moment, there is insufficient information to determine whether Ukrainian forces have the resources to contain Russian forces. The Russian grouping assembled in the Pokrovsk direction reportedly numbers more than 100,000 troops, raising the risk of further expansion. The sequence is simple: identify a weak point in the enemy's defense, penetrate it, widen the breach, and then deploy exploitation forces into the operational space to achieve operational goals via maneuver. Currently, the Russians have located and penetrated a weak point. They must still expand the breach and commit their exploitation forces. Only then would this qualify as an operational breakthrough. And if subsequent maneuvers succeed and evolve into a collapse of defenses, resulting in chaos and loss of unit cohesion. To summarize, the situation could undeniably deteriorate to a catastrophic level with far worse consequences, a plausible scenario given the lead up to negotiations. That said, we are not there yet, and the coming days will show whether this penetration can be contained. Again, I think that's a really fair assessment. Now, what is the Ukrainian reaction? Kyiv Independent reports that the elite Azov Corps has been deployed to Pokrovsk sector amid Russian advances. The first Azov Corps described the situation along the Pokrovsk axis as complex and dynamic, with Russian troops attempting to advance. Some people saying a little late after the breakthrough, but that's the reaction. A few days ago, the Azov Corps took up defensive positions on the Pokrovsk axis. Units have implemented measures to block Russian forces. Quote, the situation remains difficult and dynamic. The enemy attempting to advance in this direction is suffering heavy losses, the Corps stated. So the official line from the Ukrainians is that, hey, don't worry, it's difficult, but actually it's not nearly as bad as you think, and they are taking really heavy losses. In response to reports of a possible Russian breakthrough in the Pokrovsk Dobropillia area, Sersky Commander-in-Chief has deployed additional forces and assets to detect and destroy Russian sabotage groups infiltrating beyond the defensive line. Operational Grouping Dnipro reports. And here, Visioner says Denis Prokopenko's, his corps has already taken positions near Dobropillia Kramatorsk Highway and will soon begin an operation to destroy the infiltrated occupiers. A localized counteroffensive is likely to start during the day, and to stabilize the situation and maintain defensive positions, the National Guard unit will remain in the area. So here we have Colonel Denis Prokopenko, the commander for the 1st Corps National Guard, structure the 1st Presidential Brigade, the 12th Special Purpose Brigade, that's Azov, Borevi Azov, 20th Operational Brigade, Lubyat, actually Assault Brigade, OPI is Assault Brigade, I think. We got the 14th Assault Brigade and 15th Assault Brigade, the Chervona Kalinya and Karadag. Karadag are pretty useful unit as well. Okay, so no report says the AFU reports that Russian forces have concentrated over 110,000 personnel in this axis, with attempts to advance using small infantry and sabotage groups. According to the statement, some groups were destroyed, others are being targeted, and additional Ukrainian reserves are now being deployed. I imagine aviation is going to be very heavily used in the area, or at least that's what I would do. You've got some pretty decent aviation with guided glide bombs. Absolutely hammer the crap out of the Russians in those areas. Just, this is a definite time to bring in the big guns to absolutely destroy the Russians in situ. So the Ukrainian command is transferring its reinforcements to the Zolotyi Kolodyaz Dobropillia breakthrough, says Playfra. He says a 92nd Assault Brigade from the Kharkiv front has been called in, and the 4th National Guard Brigade Rubizh from the Dobropillia front. Well, I mean, that is from where they're at to where they're at. So I don't know. Anyway, he mentions another couple. So he says about the one at Dobropillia was transferred from the front of Dobropillia to the tip of the spearhead. He says there. Um, yes, plus the Azov, which I knew about but couldn't tell until now, as the info was made public. So he's saying, better news now. Uh, so like, as someone says, but what was the good news you referred to earlier? Yeah, the Azov being sent there. So good units have been sent to the area to support this. Now, Jimmy Russian, security analyst in Kiev, saying, I'm generally hesitant to offer opinions such as this, but it is painfully obvious that Sersky needs to go, and he needs to go now. That is one opinion. I would wouldn't say that that would be wise at the moment. I don't know enough about how, and I said the same about Zaluzhny. Like, that he went, everyone's like, but yeah, but he's brilliant. I don't know that we could have it, that we had enough information just from being out here in the general public to know how good Solution was at what he was doing. I mean, there are some who would say that that May 2023 counteroffensive was really poorly executed, and that was him doing it. Although some will also blame influence from Western forces in that as well. But anyway, yeah, there are people calling for Suski to go. Jakub Janovsky's far more kind of in the middle here. He's from Oryx, saying, in my opinion, people should avoid jumping on both "there are no problems" and "we are doomed" bandwagons. Reporting from the war in Ukraine has always oscillated between extremes, despite reality almost always being firmly in the middle. This is kind of my opinion, I think. Both sides have problems, some stupid commanders, operational screw-ups, etc. And while Russia can afford then more than Ukraine, its resources are not infinite. Focusing on the extremes instead of finding ways to fix or reform things that are broken is unhelpful. I think that's generally useful. Now, we're going to finish with Andrew Perpetua, like a bit of Andrew Perpetua's analysis. So let's go to that. The reporting on what is going on around Pokrovsk has been very misleading, and a lot of people are drawing the wrong conclusions. First, let's start by describing what this is absolutely not: a breakthrough. It just isn't. The people saying it are being hysterical. In reality, Russia has shifted to primarily using the following tactic. You take two men dressed in cloaks to hide their thermal signature. They are led by a drone through a specified path, the drone ensuring their security and camouflage. These infantry move up into positions and lay in wait, being resupplied by Molnia. So these are the very simple drones that are often packed with payloads, but fixed-wing drones, but here are being used to resupply. They ambushed opportunistically and kill anyone, namely civilians, who threaten to give away their position. Russia then moves up another pair and another pair and another pair to accumulate forces in exacting specified positions. The entire operation is directed from above. The people involved have no initiative. In some cases, once a route has enough of those small rifle teams, they push forward a larger group of light infantry. So the solution to the problem includes things like: one, bolstering communication between units in the area; two, forming more quick reaction forces; three, putting more reconnaissance assets in the area to track Russian movements; four, cutting off the supply routes and shooting down supply drones; and ultimately five, going into dugouts and other positions to destroy the rifle teams where they are hiding. The people claiming Russia has advanced are basically bullshitting you. There isn't an advance. The reality is that it isn't a coherent front line. Um, so, and take that with a pinch of salt. Obviously, that's his opinion. For example, War Vehicle Tracker says, so why then did deep state mark it as an advance? Why not put it in as a grey zone, which is basically what you're describing, a biggie grey zone, which is actually what Andrew has on his map. What I assume is that those exact DRGs you're describing actually took the positions. So the point Ukraine lost control of that section. It is just not a coherent front line. I'd assume Ukraine could move up and retake these positions right now if it's just a bunch of non-initiative two-man DRG teams. But I assume that's not the case, is it? Also, Molnia to resupply. Do you have a video? Those are suicide drones. So, like I said, they're normally fixed-wing payload drones. But I don't think Andrew would be talking about Molnia being resupplying drones if he didn't have evidence of that. And he looks at an awful lot of footage. So that is Andrew's actually, and he's sometimes been accused of being a doomsayer, is actually more on the positive or maybe realistic view of this, probably derived from videos he's been looking at. But nonetheless, there's a whole range of interpretations of the data of what's going on here. It is certainly uncomfortable that the Russians have moved that far into Ukrainian territory and are pretty much on the main defensive uh, fortification line there. And if they get past that is a problem. And it's all about whether they can exploit it with exploitation troops. If that happens, trouble. So the Ukrainians definitely need to come down hard on this and absolutely wipe it out, and then use it as a lesson. Like, how did it happen? How do we stop this happening again in the future? And again, I want to go back to They've used motorbikes and buggies in this, and that's not immediately true. Some people are claiming that. Others, like Andrew, are saying this is done on foot using. And there have been a lot of videos. I've not shown you them. There've been a lot of videos of Russians using thermal blankets to move through fields, and quite often getting seen and getting hit by drones. But we don't know when they've not been seen, right? Because they're not seen. So I would presume that on a lot of other occasions, they are getting through certain areas using thermal blankets to cover their heat signature. And that is how they're getting through slowly and surely, though. So, if the Ukrainians can come down heavily on these Russians and wipe out the forces that are there before the Russians can throw in other forces, then that would be good news. We will have to see, especially since the Russians will have less ability to use drones in this area as it would elsewhere. So, yeah, that's my interpretation, which is a bit of everything. Let me know what you think about this, but lots of people are talking about it, so I figured I did have to do my own video. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.